Yeah, that's that recording. Of course he would do it just before we set up, wouldn't he?
I pointed this out to my mother, and I asked her if she wanted me to stay home. She did think that it was odd, but she told me not to worry about it. She said that she would lock the doors, and if she needed me, she would call me. Now, in the 5 minutes it took me to get into my car and make a quick detour to the turnabout in back of the house in order to check on the light before I left, the light was gone, and the door to the pump house was closed. However, the pedestrian door to the side of the garage that was attached to the house was now open. I don't know why I didn't stop then and go back inside. I should have, but I just didn't, and I just headed on to our neighbor's house. Moments later, Debbie reaches her neighbor's house without incident and calls her mother to tell her that she arrived safely. At this point, her mother was calm and sounded normal, but shortly after this, there was a phone call from her mother, who now sounded frightened and urgently implored her to come back home right away. Debbie would later find out that her mother had seen a basketball-sized ball of light, which was hovering in the backyard. But at that very moment, it was not clear why she was so panicked and scared, and incessantly begging Debbie to come home. So Debbie then excused herself, apologizing to the neighbor, and then driving the short distance back home, where she found her mother cowering in the house and frantically looking through the window outside. And Debbie describes what happened next. Once I arrived, I pulled around at the back of the house again. This time, I stopped at the sunroom outside access door and found my mom standing there waiting for me. As I walked in, I went for the shotgun that Daddy had behind the trash compactor. Mom made a comment about the gun not being loaded, and I said to her that whoever was out there
Go on,
didn't know
Percy,
that,
you can move
and I could
now.
always just beat the crap out of them with it. Now, I have to say at this point, I do not know what came over me. I'm no fool, and at that time in my life, I was the biggest chicken in the world. If I had known why my mom called me back that night, I would have never gone back out. I would have gone in the front door, grabbed my mom and my kids, and hightailed it out of there so fast, it would have made your head spin. Making the whole situation even eerier and more surreal was at the time, Debbie's mother not only had no idea why she was in a panic, but she didn't even remember calling her daughter. At this point, they both thought that it was just an intruder, so Debbie crept outside with a shotgun and approached the pump house, ready to wave around her empty gun to frighten any trespasser away. However, no one was in the pump house, nor was there any sign of an intruder anywhere. The only thing that was out of place was her dog, which was now cowering under a truck and growling uncontrollably. As she continued her search of the yard, outbuildings, and garage, she was suddenly aware of a growing burning sensation throughout her entire body, which she would later equate to being splashed with acid, and this sensation grew in intensity until she had the sudden, undeniable urge to get out of there immediately, because she believed that her life was in danger. And this is what happened next. I suddenly felt as if I was on fire. All the skin on my body started burning. It felt like I was covered with acid, and I thought, I gotta get out of here right now. I then turned to run out the pedestrian door, and that is when I was hit in the chest by something very bright and electrifying. I have never been hit by lightning, but if I could imagine what it would feel like, I would say it was like this. It felt as if I had first been punched by a huge electric fist right in my gut. This burning electrical feeling slowly moved down my legs to my feet, out my arms to my fingertips, and around my head. Then I could feel every molecule in my body vibrating. I couldn't move, and I couldn't see because the flash was so bright. I know I could not have tolerated more than a few seconds of this, but I swear it felt as if this lasted for several minutes. I assumed, though, it couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds. I remember thinking, I'm dead. This is what it feels like to die. I was shaking and burning, and I felt like I was vibrating to my very core. The brightness wore off fast, and then the vibrating and shaking subsided, but I still couldn't move. I was able to see bits and pieces, very much like having been flashed in the eye by a camera flash. I had big blind spots in my vision, but I could see some shadow, and I could tell that there was some movement in the yard, in front of me. At this moment, I could now feel someone pulling on my right shoulder, as if to pull me down a bit. Then I felt a stabbing, burning sensation in my right ear, and I could hear someone telling me that it was unfortunate that I had to feel pain. After this, Debbie suddenly and inexplicably found herself further outside, with no idea of how she had gotten there, and above her hovered a bright light, about the size and shape of a basketball. The light moved up and down, as if scanning her, and then slowly became an oval shape before disappearing. At this moment, Debbie saw yet another egg-shaped object, and around it she could see several humanoid figures. And she says this: I could see something. It was about the size of the pool pump house, maybe 8 to 10 feet tall, and it was shaped like an egg. And I could see 6 people in the yard in front of me. They were at various points in the yard, and at the same time, they all seemed to line up and then slide to the left, and then back to this egg-shaped thing that was in front of me. They were smaller than me, shorter. I thought they looked like children. They were bullet-shaped children, bigger in the head and getting narrow at the feet. I couldn't see much detail, mostly just silhouettes. Now, the rest of this event is still a blur after 20 years. The next thing I remember is hearing someone say, "It's over." And at that moment, I suddenly remembered my kids. I thought, my kids, oh my God. And I immediately heard the voice say that my kids were okay. Then I heard my name being called, and I was able to move, and I turned and began to walk up the lower porch steps and toward the back kitchen door. With each step I took, the memory of what had just transpired faded, until by the time I reached my mom at the back door, I did not remember anything after I entered the garage. I said to my mom, "Everything's cool." And with that, she became animated again. It was as if she was standing there in a daze, until she heard my voice.
We're having a sudden temperature change. It suddenly shot up from 24
Before I continue, please
26.1.
consider showing your support by subscribing, sharing, and giving the podcast a positive review. You can also visit me on Patreon, buy
Now
me a
it's dropped
coffee,
again.
or PayPal and make a donation, or become a member, starting at just $1 a month. You can even join my Patreon membership for free and get access to all of my future updates. And of course, just listening to the show is the best support of all, and I'm grateful to have you here. Now, please stay tuned, and I'll be right back after these brief messages. At this point, Debbie decides to go back to the neighbor's house, and when she arrives there, they tell her that she has been gone for 2 hours, despite the fact that to her, only 15 minutes had passed. At this point, she rather oddly felt like going for a swim in the pool, and she invited the neighbor and her daughter to join her. As they made their way to the pool, things would get even stranger still, as Debbie goes on to describe. As we walked through the backyard to the swimming pool, my neighbor's daughter suddenly jumped and yelled, "Ouch!" She said that she had stepped on something that made her foot burn, and now her foot was going numb. By the time we reached the pool, she said that her foot felt numb all the way to the knee, but yet she could walk on it. We weren't in the pool for more than 10 or 15 minutes when we all started feeling nauseated, and my eyesight started getting really fuzzy, even though I had not had my head under water. I could see halos around all the outside lights, and it was making me dizzy. Then the girls left, and I went to bed, and when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't open my eyes. They were swollen, completely shut. My mother took me to the emergency room, and they, in turn, sent me directly to an eye specialist across the street from the ER, because they said they didn't have anyone on call in the ER who was able to treat something like this. This doctor was just across the street, and agreed to work me in and see me that morning. He was stunned at the extent of my injury. He kept asking me if I had looked into the arc of a welder's torch, or maybe the sun, which I had not. I was then given several tubes of cream and some drops to try to heal my eyes. It took several weeks for them to fully recover, and to this day, my eyes are very sensitive to light. Also, my vision is very farsighted, Sometimes my eyes will still suddenly burn and turn red for no apparent reason. Fortunately, though, this only lasts for a few minutes. The following week after the incident, they were all having a barbecue in their backyard when one of the guests noticed an 8-foot circle with a 20-foot swath of wilted dead grass coming off of it, which for some strange reason seemed to instill a sense of panic within Debbie. This mark on the grass would prove to have some rather strange qualities, of which Debbie would describe. The mark in the yard remained there for nearly 5 years. Every year the snow melted off of it. Animals wouldn't walk on it. There were no bugs in the soil. Even when the grass finally did begin to grow back, the grass in that place was thick, rubbery, and kind of a bluish-green color. The dandelions that grew around the mark were 3 times the size of normal ones. The tomato plants that my mom had out by the pool were the size of grapefruits, but when you would try to eat them, they were so acidic that the skin on your lips would peel off, and the vines were as big around as my forearm. The leaves on a patch of trees behind the mark withered, turned brown, and then fell off. The power line above the mark shorted out and blew a transformer, melted the wiring, and then blew out the tubes on the ham radios in the basement of the house, which was right next to the place in the yard. The aftermath of this day was a nightmare for several years. I was shell-shocked. I sat up at night watching over my children and waiting for something, but I didn't remember what it was I was waiting for. I got sick, and I stayed sick for over a year. I developed life-threatening allergies, rashes, fevers, swollen glands, diarrhea, bleeding gums, and my hair began to fall out. My fingernails even started growing thin, peeled, and had horizontal ridges in them. I developed irregular heartbeats, and I started having panic attacks almost daily for a very long time. Oh, and the dog that was out there with me that night? She had to be put to sleep about 2.5 months later. All of her hair fell out from the head
Sounds
down.
like
She
radiation.
developed black, oozing sores all over her back. Her eyes got milky white,
Definitely.
and she was obviously going deaf. Her teeth all fell out, and her gums bled as well. When we took her to the vet, he was shocked to see how quickly she had deteriorated. She was not that old, only about 6 or 7, and the way she looked, you would have thought that she was 20 years old. He advised us to put her down because he felt that she was suffering, and he couldn't help her. He figured that she was all eaten up with cancer of some kind. I think of my dog and the fate that she met. In my heart, I believe that whatever she encountered that night was directly related to her untimely death, and there is a part of me that still worries I will eventually have some kind of cancer related to my experience of that night. There is nothing I can do about it right now, though, except to take good care of myself and hope for the best. It would also turn out that other people in that area had seen basketball-sized orbs of light flying about as well, and Debbie reached out to a UFO researcher, Bud Hopkins, who would conduct a thorough investigation into the incident and then write of it in his best-selling 1987 book, Intruders: The Incredible Visitation at Copley Woods. And after this, it hit the public consciousness and appeared in a 1992 CBS miniseries of the same name. In 1993, Debbie's sister would write a book on it as well, called Abducted: The Story of the Intruders Continues, and it has gone on to be one of the most shocking and intriguing alien encounter reports on record, and it's been investigated by other notable UFO researchers, such as Linda Moulton Howe. As for her own thoughts on the whole affair, Debbie herself has remained rather introspective on it all, rather bravely embracing what happened to her and looking at it as a defining moment in her life. And Debbie says this: I often wonder what my life would have been like had I not experienced it. I can't imagine. Truthfully, despite the obvious trauma, I don't think I would change a thing. I have become a much stronger person. I don't give credit to the experience or the intruders, other than it forced me to be strong and to survive and grow. And I kind of like that about me. And that is the story to this day. You know that when you can name the date and the time of an event, that it must have made quite an impression on you. June 30th, 1983 made such an impression on me that it actually crushed the old me, while molding the new one. Now that's a defining moment. These are just a few of the stranger details of this case, and there are many more events that this article doesn't mention. So if you found this experience as interesting as I did, I recommend looking into it even further. And if you'd like to read the entire article for yourself, please visit the show notes and click on the link that I've provided. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and if you'd like to submit your experience or learn more about supporting what I do, you can find all my contact and support information in the show notes. And of course, at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.
Dong. Alexa, what's the front room temperature?
Welcome once again, and thank you for being here.
Temperature is 25.22
I'm your host.
degrees.
Nick Ryan.
Still high.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by my newest supporter, Kari. Thank you so much for making the show possible. Our first experience of the night comes to us from Jeannie, and Jeannie's story is called Spirit Experiences and a Voided Space. Hello, Nick. Firstly, I wanted to say I recently found your podcast, and I absolutely love it. Thank you for the stories that you've shared from listeners, and for providing a safe place for people to talk about their experiences. I am one of those people who likes to know the full story, so I started with your first episode about 2 months ago, and I just finished episode 86. I have no idea if these stories will align with where your podcast is currently, but I figured that I'd share them in case it was ever relevant. I have changed the names of anyone mentioned in the stories for their privacy and my own, as I do not talk about this part of my life with many people, and I have recommended this to several friends and co-workers. To give a brief summary, I have always been an intuitive person, and have experienced many things that can be labeled as paranormal. Some include never being wrong about the gender of my friends' and family's babies, sensing family passing, seeing spirits or demons, getting vibes, and seeing auras. It has been a long road of self-discovery. I was raised in a family that very strongly believed in evidence and fact-checking, so I have doubted myself for a long time, as I am not always able to explain exactly what happened to me. I always do my best to research after an experience to try and find an explanation or validate my experience. However, it's not always fruitful. I do know what I experienced, though, and with that being said, here are my stories. My first story happened around October of 2015, about 1 year into dating my current husband, Justin. We were having a family game night at his cousin's house who lived about 45 minutes away from us. It was my first time at their house, and I was still nervous being around his family, and was very much an introvert who hated this sort of thing. Once we got there, we were welcomed in and hung out in the living room for a short time. Part of the party then migrated to the kitchen, so I asked Justin where I should put my jacket, as I was still holding on to it. He went to ask, and then just told me from around the corner to put it in the upstairs guest bedroom, and he then pointed to the staircase, which I hadn't noticed yet. This part is important to remember for the next story as well. I started to go up the stairs and made it about 4 steps up before I stopped dead in my tracks. Now I don't know what made me stop, but I just felt like I shouldn't go any further than I it. I'd if she meant the spirit was aware I'd already looked at several houses, kitchen and backyard, so we split up. After doing a quick once-over, they needed some hour again, nor cleaning the living room when she saw what she described as a ghost of an old woman. It was interesting to have someone who was unaware of my experience, that to get worn out from the picture, and also anger. I knew the anger was nice, and laughed. As soon as we got to the spirit seems to stay. That was solidified for me. It's like the rooms are void, or has any kind of explanation. Thank you for all you do, and for reading, and I look forward to all the episodes ahead of me. Stay well. Jeannie. Our next experience of the night comes to us from Sarah. And Sarah says, "Hi Nick, I've been meaning to send this story to you since it happened, but first here's some backstory. I have seen a tall man in my peripheral vision in our hallway on numerous occasions. Usually when I'm going into another room, I can see him standing in the bathroom doorway. But when I look over, he's gone." The story I'm about to tell happened October 29th of 2022, right near when the veil is thin. I was at an art show that I was a part of the night before, so I made arrangements for my kids to sleep at their grandparents. My husband was on shift, so he slept downstairs, and I slept upstairs so I didn't wake him up when I came home. On the morning of the 29th, I woke up around 8:15 a.m., which isn't normal for me, but like I said, the kids were at their grandparents'. My German Shepherd was the one that woke me up, wanting to go outside to relieve herself, so I got out of bed and I let her out. I then went back to bed thinking how glorious it was to have a morning so quiet, and laying in bed. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and I began to search for pictures of the art show from the night before. Now, my bed faces the doorway, so I can see into the hallway and right into a bathroom. Right when I started to look at my phone, I heard a step and a creak in the hallway. I thought to myself, no one's home, and dog and cats are outside. It must just be the house. Right as I thought that though, and while gazing at my phone, I saw a head peep out from behind the wall to look into my room. And as I dragged my eyes to look at it, it popped back behind the wall. Well, let me tell you how fast I jumped and ran to the doorway. As I was doing it, I knew I wasn't going to see anything. Well, maybe hoping anyway. And I was right. When I got to the doorway and looked down the hall, there was nothing there. Had there actually been someone, I would have heard them go down the hall. At this point, I quickly headed for the outside door and I let my dog back inside. After she was in, I said to myself, well, I guess I'm not going back to bed now. And then I went downstairs to get dressed. Looking back on the experience, I wasn't afraid or had a feeling of threat. It was like it was curious and wanted to see what I was doing. Another thing that happened in that room was when it was my son's room about 8 years ago when he was 3. He woke me up yelling in the middle of the night. I ran to his room, and he said that there was a man sitting in the rocking chair across from his bed. I believed him when he said it, and I didn't know what to do. I believe I said, he won't hurt you, and he's gone now. I took the rocking chair out of his room the next day. I do have another story about him that I will write about another day, but it's longer than the quick ones that I just told. Take care, and thank you for all the work you do on the podcast. I enjoy it immensely. Sarah. Before I continue, please consider showing your support by subscribing, sharing, and giving the podcast a positive review. You can also visit me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or PayPal and make a donation, or become a member, starting at just $1 a month. You can even join my Patreon membership for free and get access to all of my future updates. And of course, just listening to the show is the best support of all, and I'm grateful to have you here. Now, please stay tuned, and I'll be right back after these brief messages. Our next experience of the night comes to us from Julia. and Julia's experience is called House Spirits Playing Around. Julia says, "Hello, Nick. I've been a listener for several weeks. Thanks for making your podcast. I love listening to it during my walks or while doing house chores. Please keep on going. I can share with you some paranormal stories about what happened to me and my family. Here comes my first story. It was several years ago, and I was living alone back then in a city flat. One night, I woke up, and I felt that my shoulders were slightly cold because the blanket had slipped down a bit. I usually like being warm, and I cover myself completely, but I was too sleepy to move. Suddenly,
Things are
I
happening.
felt the blanket
Temperatures
being
have shot
gently
up
pulled up to cover my
26.2,
shoulders, and immediately after,
26.1,
I felt something
26,
on my bed.
25.9,
It was the specific feeling of a
25.7,
cat curling up by my side. All you cat owners will know what I'm talking about. It was a feeling of a
25.6,
cat's weight, warm, and
25.5,
curled up shape on my blanket next to me.
25.4,
I do love cats, but I
25.4,
didn't have one at that time.
25.3,
There was no chance of a cat sneaking in through my
25.2,
window because I was living
25.1,
on the third floor, and I keep my windows, and of course doors,
flashing between
closed.
1 and 2,
Now, I was shocked by these
25,
sensations, and I quickly reached out to switch the
24.9.
light on. And of course, there
Well,
was
there
nothing
should
on my
be
bed.
in there.
I shared this experience with my friends, and they said that it must have been a house spirit, also known as a brownie or a domovoi who likes me, because I was
Yeah.
actually treated nicely by it. The flat where I lived had no history.
Yeah,
I was the
it's
first
set to
person who lived there,
24.9.
so
But
I
it's
don't
just
think that it could have been a ghost of a deceased
very
pet, for
26.
example. And I had
Oh,
no more such
24.8 is still
experiences
dropping.
in that flat. Years later, I got married and we moved to an old house in a village, and sometimes I heard unexplained noises. One time, 2 empty wine glasses that stood by the sink in my kitchen clinked together. I stood 1 meter away with my back turned to the sink. I turned to watch, but there was nothing that could have caused the glasses to move or even shake, and there was about a 2 centimeters gap between them. This was a substantial distance, and they could have only touched each other if somebody or something moved them. Then I did a test, and I clinked them together myself while they were still standing there. It was the exact same sound, and to produce it I had to really lean them toward each other. My husband was in the other room nearby, and I asked him if he could hear the glasses clinking, and he said yes. I then asked him how many times, and he said twice. Then I explained to him that the first time wasn't me. Another time, I was alone at home with one of our dogs.
No.
There are always some dog toys scattered around on our floor,
Yeah,
and
that
one of
was
them is a
pig.
rubber pig that makes this typical piggy oink sound when it's squeezed. So, it's quiet. The dog was next to me, and I clearly heard the sound of that dog toy coming from another room, where the
There's a
dog toy was
light in the
laying.
kitchen.
Me and my dog both looked at each other. I then checked the entire flat, of course, as well as the toy, and there was nothing that could have caused the sound accidentally. I have to say that this sound is very specific, and I couldn't mix it up with anything else, and there are no noises that come from the street at our house. Both of these occasions were happening at daytime, and I didn't feel any fear or bad energy. It was just puzzling to hear all that. I have more stories to tell about our experiences in this house, especially about what happened to my husband, but I will describe them next time. I hope you're well, Nick. Take care, and all the best. Julia. Our next experience comes to us from Anonymous.
You see it, lights
And
on.
Anonymous's
There's no
story
light
is
switch.
called Friendly Ghost.
Oh,
Anonymous
that's
says,
exact.
when I was 18 or 19, I had just moved out of my dad's house. I lived in a large home with multiple roommates, where we all rented rooms. This home, for context, had 3 levels. The basement, which was at the ground level and was pretty large with multiple rooms. The main level, which had a large living room, large kitchen, dining room, and 1 bedroom. And the 3rd floor was just a large loft, which was just a large bedroom, with its own bathroom. To get to the basement from the main floor, there were wooden stairs that were very creaky whenever you would walk on them, and more often than not, they were very dark. There was a door at the bottom of those stairs in the basement, but not at the top. For added context, I knew the family that owned this house very well. One of the people that lived there was one of my best friends, and still is. His grandparents owned the home, and his family built it. At that point in time, there were no deaths in the home, and none that I could find online on the property. However, it was a 13-acre property, and some of the materials used to build the home did come from that property. One of the most common occurrences in the home that many of us often experience was footsteps going both up and down the stairs from the main floor to the basement. As I said, the stairs were very creaky, so you could always hear someone going up or down from almost anywhere in the home. We all often heard footsteps with no one there. On that same note of the stairs, later on living there, I had a son, and at 1 or 2 years old, whenever we were on the main floor, he was scared to walk past those same stairs. From the main floor looking down the stairs, it was often dark, as the door at the bottom of the stairs was almost always closed. He would often run from the living room to the kitchen, but whenever he passed those stairs, he would slow down and just stare down them, and he always looked uneasy. The main occurrence that happened to me was when I was pregnant and not working. The father of my best friend that I mentioned was very sick. He had a brain tumor, and at the time I was not working, so I stayed home and cared for him 99% of the time. He was completely bedridden, and he was hardly verbal. He was in the bedroom on the main floor off the living room, and I was sitting on the couch which faces that bedroom. The door to that bedroom was closed, but there was a large window on it, and he was in the room sleeping. It was then that I saw a figure walk across that room, and I know there was no way that it was him, as he was 100% bedridden. Around the same time as my experiences, there were a few guys sitting in the dining room playing their guitars, and I was sitting on the couch
Finding
in the
again,
living room.
26,
One of the
26
guys
1,
then came out of the living room and
26
asked
2,
me, "Were
now
you just in
dropping
the
again,
kitchen?"
26
But I
1,
told him, "No, I've been sitting here
26.
for a while." They insisted, however, that they saw someone walk past them into the kitchen from the living room. Those were the occurrences that stood out the most. I never felt anything negative from whoever or whatever it was. It just felt like it coexisted with us. It's been around 10 years since then, and
Down
I
to
am still in
25
contact
two.
with my best friend who still lives there. He says that it still
25
happens
1.
now as well. As I said, there were no deaths in the home until his dad passed away,
24 9.
and I have tried to research the property, but I couldn't find anything. His mom thinks that something is attached to the rocks that were used around the fireplace and the stairs. She believes this because they came in off the property. Our next experience comes to us from Nadine, and Nadine's experience is called Just a Few
24 8
Encounters.
now.
Nadine says, "Back in the mid-1990s, I lived in Guerneville, California. I loved this house. In fact, I often dream about being back there. I had matured camellia, rhododendrons, and clematis, and there were always flowers in bloom. It was such a happy home. I lived there with my ex and our son, who at the time was 2. This house was
Where
very
do we
long
get
and
them
had
heat
no
from?
master bedroom, as in there was no attached bathroom, but there was a half bath at the end of the hallway, and our bedroom was the first door next to it. One night, I got up to use the toilet, and as I came out, I saw my ex at the end of the hall, and he was fully dressed. I couldn't see his face, but who else would it be? He was wearing jean shorts, sneakers, a t-shirt, and a zip-up hoodie. I said to him, 'Mike, what are you
24.7.
doing?' And he then answered me from the bedroom to my left. I yelled, 'Oh my God, there's a man in our house.' Mike then got up, and we searched the entire house together, but we were locked up tight, without anyone in the home. From that point on, many things happened. I would feel someone sit down next to me, and I would actually see the depression in the couch or bed. I was laying down on the couch one day and went to put in my earplugs to take a nap. I looked over to the coffee table, and one earplug was rolling back and forth, as if it was under someone's finger. It didn't really scare me, and I just rolled over and took my nap. On Thanksgiving, I invited a new employee to celebrate with us as she had no family in the area. She spent the night, and she
God, it
told me in the
dropped
morning that she
24.6
slept
then.
great, until Mike sat down on the end of the couch to put his shoes on. Well, just then Mike came into the living room and said, 'I just got out of bed, and I don't have my shoes on. Plus, we have another couch, so why would I sit on the one that you're
26
sleeping on?'
3.
She was absolutely
Bloody hell.
baffled, and I then told her, You met the man in the house. I missed this house so much. He was not a scary ghost, and I did some research, and I believe that he was a former owner who passed away in the house about 6 months before his wife passed. I explained to him that she had already passed, and that he didn't need to wait for her, but that he was welcome to stay if that's what he wanted. I just made it clear that I really don't want to see him again. It frightened me a bit, and I didn't want that to happen anymore. I never saw him again. I don't know if he moved on or just continued about his life in that beautiful house. But I would move back there if I could. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and before I leave you, I'd like to thank Jeannie, Sarah, Julia, Anonymous, and Nadine for coming forward with their experiences. And if you'd like to share your paranormal encounter or learn more about supporting the show, you can find all my contact and support information in the show notes and at paranormalmysteriespodcast.com. Until next time, thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you back here in my next episode of Paranormal Mysteries.
First time it happened,
She sounds very
I
quiet
was
tonight.
sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
Oh, someone just moved in
And
there.
he come across this
And the
object on
temperature
the
dropped
ground,
up to
which was a shape of a flying
26.3.
saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision, I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7, 8 foot tall. It was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast. I am your host, Nick Ryan. Our first story of the day comes from Danny in Australia. Danny says, "Hi Nick, I recently begun listening to your podcast. So many awesome stories. I have been an empath since I was younger and have seen spirits since I was 11. I would like to tell you one of my stories. I was 11 years old at my nanny's house. I was sitting at the kitchen table playing cards. My grandfather was at the pub, and my nanny was outside hanging out the wash. The kitchen door was shut. All of a sudden, the door opened, and I saw an older woman walk in. She walked to the breakfast bench and put her elbows on it. I said hello. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me and smiled. I called out to my nanny, but she couldn't see me. So I got up and walked past the woman and opened the door to call my nanny. When I turned back in the kitchen, the woman was gone. I asked my nanny if she had a friend over, and she said no. I told her of the woman I saw, and she said, it's okay, spirits won't hurt you. Later that evening, we were watching TV. I was looking through one of my nanny's albums, because I didn't like the show that was on. All of a sudden, I turned the page, and there was a photograph of the woman that I saw. I said, Nanny, that's the woman. She smiled and said, that's your great-grandma. So I met my great-grandmother after death. No wonder she looked so proud. Thank you. Our next story comes from Devin. Devin says, I have several stories that have happened to me. Some I remember well, others not too well. So some will be longer than others. Story 1. When I was little, I was playing in the living room while my mother was on the phone. After a while, she got off the phone. Just a few seconds later, a door slammed upstairs, and we both decided to go up and check it out. When we got upstairs, my bedroom door was shut when I knew I had left it open, because I was just up there to grab a toy. We didn't witness anything else that day.
24.6.
Story 2. I had gone into the kitchen one night to grab something. I had turned, and for some strange reason, I found myself looking into the laundry room. I saw a black shadow of a man with a top hat. I knew it wasn't my shadow
It's jumping
because it
up
was taller than I was,
26.2.
and I wasn't wearing a top hat.
26.3.
A few years later, I was at my grandmother's house, and I saw the same dark figure. I was so confused because I knew what I was seeing, but I couldn't understand why I was seeing it there. Then there was one night I was talking to my grandma and told her about the times I saw the shadow, and she knew exactly what I was talking about. She had told me that it was Fred, and that she had seen him too. I asked how, and she explained that they used to have a mirror that faced the front door to see who was entering the house. There would be times they would look up and catch a shadow in the mirror, exactly like I had described. Story 3. I was living in Hastings, Nebraska, and I had a room in the attic. Up there, a door was on the far end, blocking off the furnace. The rest of the upstairs could be another room. When one night I was fast asleep, and I was awakened out of a dead sleep by something grabbing my foot and pulling me. I shot up and wasn't sure of what happened. I then saw the lights turn on under the door, on the far side of the room. About that time, I heard scratching down in the kitchen, which was right at the bottom of my stairs. I worked up the nerve to run through the kitchen, and then ran into my parents' room, and told them about what had happened. I was told to just go back to sleep, in my siblings' room, because they were sleeping in my parents' room, because they were very young and didn't like sleeping in the dark. I finally fell asleep in my sister's bed, and I remember having a dream of being with a friend. I wasn't sure why I was having this dream. Then the friend in the dream hit me in the chest, and that's when I woke up, because I was hit in the chest and it felt like someone was above me and hit me right when I was hit in my dream. Story 4. There was one night when there was a bad thunderstorm rolling in. I was living in the country at the time, and I had a friend over at the time. I was in the kitchen with my mother and friend, and I decided I needed to grab something from upstairs, which involves me walking through the living room and up the stairs. In the living room, there was a big window looking out to the driveway and the fields. When I walked in the room, I happened to look out the window, and in the driveway, there were two little kids holding hands, just standing there. I don't remember any detail on their faces or anything. I just remember seeing them, and then I froze, and tears started to run down my face, due to the fear catching me. My friend and mom asked what was going on, but I couldn't seem to talk. I was just frozen in place, pointing out the window. I was finally able to get myself to move and get upstairs, but I couldn't sleep that night at all. Story 5. I was fast asleep one night, and I wasn't sure why, but I woke up out of a dead sleep, and I remember not being able to move or talk. I was frozen. That's when a shadow figure across my bedroom caught my eye. I continued to watch it, trying to get myself to be able to move, so I could get out of the room, but I couldn't move, not even my fingers. I kept watching this shadow, and it started to walk toward me, and that's when I started to cry, because I couldn't scream for help or move. I was frozen and couldn't defend myself. I was finally able to snap out of it, and the shadow just vanished. Story 6. I was in the car with my mother when I was being weird, and my mother and I were joking around. Well, I was watching the road for a few seconds, and saw a figure on the side of the road that looked human-like. As we drove past, I felt a sharp pain on my arm, and when I looked down, I had a fresh scratch on my arm. I told my mother, and she asked what I did, and I said nothing. I hadn't even touched that area of my arm. I told her what I saw, and how when we drove past it, it happened. She wasn't sure what to make of it, and still today, I'm not sure what I saw or what happened. Story 7. I was in an old bedroom of mine when I was home alone. I was listening to music, when I had a weird feeling that I wasn't home alone anymore. I looked out the window to see if someone was home, but there were no cars. I then looked out of the room, down the hall, and that's when I saw a little girl at the end of the hall. I then rushed back into my bedroom and shut the door. I called my mother to hurry up and get home as soon as possible. She got home, but the little girl was gone. I know I've had other encounters, but I can't remember them at this time.
24.5.
Our next story of the day comes from Lorraine. Lorraine says, "Hi Nick, I started listening to the podcast sometime last month. My story is what turned me from a skeptic to a believer overnight. It's a bit long, so please bear with me.
24.4.
My job at the time of the event that I'm telling you about was at a factory, and a popular one. I had an understanding of the paranormal, but to believe it wasn't in me. My schedule was for overnight, and I started developing insomnia because of it. So most days after I would clock out, I'd walk my dog, just to clear my head so I could sleep. This particular early morning wasn't supposed to be any different, but it ended up changing my opinion really fast. I had gotten home and I felt tired, but my mind was racing, too fast to relax. So I went and got my dog, his harness and leash. It made me smile when he looked up at me from his blanket and had gotten up so I could walk him. We walked out of the building and on our
24.3.
way to our usual route to walk. I couldn't find anything wrong with my day, except for my insomnia that would kick in. I shook it off and just continued to walk. We had gotten to the lower side of our route and almost to the corner where I turned to go up and back to my house when I heard it. It sounded like dogs running from the upper side of the route that made a hill.
Route.
When I turned to see how many, there were 4 dogs of the same breed running toward me and my dog. What pissed me off was that these dogs weren't just off leash. They didn't have any harnesses on either. My dog, being 7 at the time, still acted like a puppy and tried to hide between my legs, which made me even angrier. I put my dog behind me and I gave a sidewind kick to the dog that was up front of the group, and it spun into the other 3. The owner came down and started getting mad at me, and I started screaming at him. He finally stopped and told me that my dog was a wuss. That's when I felt a small power snap in my body, and I told him that he should keep his dogs on a freaking leash, and that he's not the only one walking his dogs. And what would he do if something was to happen to one of his dogs? Nothing, I thought, because it would be his fault for not having a leash or harness on any of them, like he did that morning. A week or so later in the daytime, I saw the man that owned the 4 dogs in the park that was in the middle of the highway. I thought he was stupid to play with his dogs at that hour, as it was rush hour for goodness sake. Shaking my head, I just kept walking my dog. Not 5 minutes later, I heard a crash and looked. One of the man's dogs had gotten hit by an SUV, and the SUV kept going. I was shocked because of what I had warned him about, and it ended up happening. Stunned, I began praying for the dog that lost its life because of its owner's carelessness. When I had gotten back home, I dug out my phone and Googled what it means when what you say ends up coming true, and to my surprise, it's called fork tongue. It's believed that those that have events happen after they've spoken about them, especially in anger, are descended from witches or to be a witch themselves. I almost dropped my phone after reading it. My mind was blown away, even though it made sense. I bit my tongue in disbelief. I told my mom, and she told me that she wasn't sure if we were, because Grandma was vague with family details. Then again, it could be from my dad's father's family. Moral of this story is, check your family's history, because there might be something witchy about them in you. Thanks for reading this if you do, and continue your success on your podcast. Lorraine, I really appreciate you writing in. Your experience is interesting, and it left me with a couple of questions. I've personally never heard the term forked tongue being used when describing someone that is a witch or has had family members that were witches. The only definition I was familiar with was when describing forked tongue as someone who lies or someone who means one thing but says another. In most cases, I would refer to your phenomenon as being prophetic, but I'm fascinated by what you found, and I'd be interested to know where you found this information, as I am always trying to learn more about the paranormal. Thank you again for writing in. Our next story of the day comes from Champ in Texas. Champ says, "Hello, Nick. I discovered your show, and I enjoy tuning in. I have often kept the situation to myself, due to the fact of how badly this affected me mentally and physically. Your show has given me the courage to finally tell this story. When I was 17, the summer before my senior year of high school, my sister and my 2 young nephews moved into our home in Texas from Florida, making it a bit of a crowded adjustment. However, I did enjoy having other people live upstairs with me. As a child, I had been a skeptic until I often had many paranormal experiences, not just at my home, but at my friends as well, as if this energy was drawn to me. I often just ignored it, as I had never experienced anything negative before until that summer. My mom was into the whole binge of going to antique shops all the time, and I was often dragged along as well.
Movement in the
We
kitchen.
went to this antique shop in Waxahachie, Texas, where I noticed a particular booth selling old photos for $1, and the booth was also closing. I bought a photo of a sailor that caught my eye, and I was just so attracted to it, and to this day, I don't know why. I also bought a box from the booth to keep jewelry in. I remember getting home and setting it on my dresser, and putting the photo of the sailor inside. I called him Eddie. He just looked like an Eddie to me. The experiences started that very night. I would usually watch TV with my sister and nephews until I got tired enough to go to sleep. I stumbled into my room and climbed into bed like usual. I drifted off to sleep, but I awoke to the sailor to the right of my bedside. I laid there, unable to talk or move. He rested a hand over my hands and nodded, as if telling me, "Go back to sleep," and I was immediately able to. The next day I told my sister of my experience. Lucky that she believed me. She also stated she thought Eddie was a positive entity. As I too thought he was positive, I began talking to him out loud when I would go into my room. To make it known I knew and accepted his presence, over the next few weeks, his presence became more prominent. One night, as I played a video game in the upstairs TV room, out of the corner of my eye, I swore I saw him walk into my bedroom. Another night, he paced in front of my bed as I went to sleep. The reason I was certain that he did is because my parents' room was directly under mine. They often complained of hearing the walking in the late hours of the night above them, and they swore it was me, but it was not. On a particular July night, the peaceful presence I was used to turned into a sinister one. The night after watching movies in my sister's room,